What does regenerative mean? It means given the right environment, your body can regenerate.
Can you speak a little bit about obviously fasting and kind of how that then leads into autophagy?
So the concept is that if you don't feed the front of your fridge, you have to eat from the back of it. So if you don't put food in your mouth, the body will find things within it to feed itself from. My belief is that the solution to well-being is nutrition. The person who can't get to sleep, it's literally the fact that they have got too much cortisol. Short stresses are good for your body.
Right.
So an acute scare, freezing cold, just for short bouts, actually increases the body's drive and kills off bad cells.
Ash, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. And thank you for inviting me. It's been
my
a real
pleasure.
privilege to come.
My pleasure, of course. I'm really excited today to talk about the world of regenerative medicine and a little bit about your medical practice, Levitas, and how you're currently, focused on treating chronic ailments, getting to the root cause of these things using regenerative medicine. And so, I guess to start with, it'd be really great to find out a little bit about your medical background and kind of how you've found yourself at the forefront of regenerative medicine.
Sure. So I guess probably best to start with my very early days. I was born in Kenya, East Africa, and it was in those days where you were literally free to run around wherever you wanted. Everybody knew who you were, and I spent a lot of my first 4 or 5 years in nature. And I think, to be honest with you, that was probably something you don't appreciate at the time, but had a fundamental sort of influence on me. And then my parents came to the UK, and I went to local schools and then went to medical school in Southampton where I trained. And during my career, I did lots of specialisms. So pediatrics, obstetrics, A&E, minor surgery, cardiology, etc. What I found was I enjoyed all of them, and I couldn't see myself just doing one thing. And I just felt I can't just look after someone's lung. They're attached to many other things. And effectively, you've got to look at people in their environments. You can't just look at one thing. So I thought, well, what can I do in medicine that will do this for me? So general practice was the place I went to. I trained in Ealing, West London, and enjoyed that. But again, I found that when I was in general practice, my role was very much maintaining and monitoring. So people were coming in with conditions, and my job was just to make sure they had enough drugs. They had the testing for the drugs. And it kind of felt a bit strange, really, and I was being paid on that basis of just maintaining people. And then every now and then I put a couple of symptoms together and make a diagnosis. And the reward system was about making a diagnosis, giving a drug, and doing a test. And I thought, this is what medicine must be. So I continued in general practice, and I became a partner in my own practice, where I'm still a partner. And the beauty of that place was I had continuity of care. I looked after a list of 2,000 patients, looked after them over a period of time. And what I found was that during this maintaining and monitoring, people weren't getting better. They were just getting put on more drugs. And then those drugs caused side effects. And then they were put on more drugs. And finally, they went into decline. And again, one thought this was normal at 60, 70, 80. But then looking at other cultures, other existences, I was finding that 70, 80, 90-year-olds were functional, walking, talking, and happy. So it made me think there must be a different way of doing things. And so I started to explore root cause analysis. That is, why does disease actually happen? And that was an eye-opener. And that brought me into the journey of regenerative medicine.
Wow. That's super interesting and something that, we're all hearing more about, I think, at the moment out there. But for people that don't really understand or know what regenerative medicine means or is, how would you kind of define it? And what are the differences between what we call modern medicine now versus what is kind of the next stage, I guess, of medicine?
Yeah. So modern medicine very much looks at expression. So if you have a skin rash or you have blood pressure, these are expressions. And modern medicine looks at suppressing that expression. So taking the pain away, taking the blood pressure down. But in fact, there's a whole process behind that expression. And that process takes us to what I call root cause analysis. Now, that word is used quite a lot. I had an interesting chat with one of my patients a couple of weeks ago, and, she came to see me and with severe insomnia. So she goes, I know what you're going to say to me, doctor. It's my hormones, it's my gut. But actually, no, it's my husband. In her case, she thought her root cause analysis was her husband and went on to talk about the issues there. And so people often don't get the link between how they think, how they're functioning, and how their body's working. And if you're really looking at true root cause analysis, it's looking at the level of the cell. Because at the end of the day, your cells make your tissues, which make your organs. So get that journey right and you're sorted. So we look at the journey between your DNA, that's your cookbook for making cells, and the cell itself. And so that is pure root cause analysis. What does regenerative means? It means given the right environment, your body can regenerate. We have baby cells inside us called stem cells that are waiting to become heart, kidney, liver. And most of us, even if we die in our 90s or our 100s, we still have stem cells waiting to become something, which means we must have prematurely declined. So why don't these stem cells continue? Well, we know that there are certain conditions around those cells that stop them working properly. And that's what regenerative medicine is. Mitigate those risks so the cells can continue to do what they need to do.
Yeah, super interesting in it. I mean, what you're basically explaining that I gather from this is kind of like the body can heal itself in a way.
Completely.
And so in a way it's kind of like, it sounds, well, to me, and I'm sure to yourself, as someone like myself who's interested in this space, it doesn't sound crazy at all. It makes total sense. But I think for a lot of people to kind of think, oh, a minute, you know what, we just allow the body in certain ways, we aid it in certain ways, you know, it can actually get to a point of healing itself, which is really interesting and something I want to discuss a little bit in depth and a little bit further down this podcast. But before we get into that, it'd be really good to hear from your point of view. Obviously, I'm understanding of kind of things like antibiotics in the 60s and certain things that have happened in our history that have impacted the increase in kind of chronic disease and different ailments. From your point of view, do you think there was or there has been any events or things that have happened in the past that have had an impact on the health of humanity or the world that have caused us to become sick, I guess?
Completely, totally. Yeah. So just to put in context, our cells are still living a life a few 100,000 years ago. Your cells adapt to their environments over periods of tens of thousands of years. And so, but if you look at your modern environment, the last couple of 100 years, you know, lighting, metropole cities, emails, these are totally foreign to your cells. So by logic, your cells are living in a toxic environment. And with that, they protest. And the protesting comes through a process called inflammation. And this inflammation can come out in many ways. It can weaken the body so you get infections. It can weaken your ability to fight things. It can almost go into a dysfunctional mode and you get what they call autoimmune disease. And all of these things, as you say, are on the rise. So yes, we have, prior to the 1920s, all healing was nutraceutical. It was nutrition. And before that, millions of years, healing was nutraceutical. But since the 20s, drugs have come in. Now, drugs do one thing. They suppress what they come in to do. So, for example, they will suppress an infection. But you live with 38 trillion bacteria in you. They will also take out other things that are helping you. So with that, whilst we're trying to suppress an expression of a disorder, we're also causing collateral damage. And that collateral damage leads to further processes in the body, which cause further decline. So if we're really going to mitigate against these secondary consequential things, we need to go back to nature and nutrition and try and avoid pharma, because pharma does not understand all 30 trillion cells. It just looks at one or two relationships. So we have done it to ourselves.
Yeah. It's a really interesting topic. I know from my own experience with Crohn's disease over the years and going through that period of being on pharma medications and trying to navigate the space and then now healing it more naturally or totally naturally. It's definitely a journey, but I feel like it's a journey that's worthwhile when you start seeing the results.
Yes.
And just based on, you mentioned inflammation there. I think inflammation is a word that is kind of tossed around quite a lot.
Yes.
And people have different meanings for it. From your point of view and within the realm of regenerative medicine, longevity, what exactly, in layman's terms, I guess, like, does inflammation mean for you?
Yeah. So most people, and even doctors, think of inflammation as a swelling somewhere, particularly a joint, that's painful, and we call that inflammation. But actually, what is inflammation? It's the body protesting. Now, the body can protest at multiple levels. If an organ protests, you get pain in that organ. Appendix inflammation is appendicitis. Tonsil inflammation is tonsillitis. Anything with itis in the end means inflammation. But before this, those cells start getting inflamed, but they're invisible to you, what I would call invisible inflammation. Now, invisible inflammation is things that haven't expressed themselves, but are working away inside you. And then suddenly the energy levels drop to such an extent that it comes out as an expression. So you mentioned Crohn's disease. Now, Crohn's disease is an expression of gut inflammation. But before that, things have begun to weaken. Your energy has depleted, so the body has to dig deeper. So the proper energy is called mitochondrial ATP energy. After that, there is immune energy, then there's hormonal energy. And your body won't let you fail. It'll just keep digging deeper. But if it digs too deep, things go wrong. So we say that inflammation is actually every single disease and disorder.
Right.
All 126,000 diseases are inflammation. There we go. If we say that, that means we can, by mitigating inflammation, we can mitigate 126,000 diseases.
Wow.
We need to change the narrative.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. I didn't actually know that was that many diseases in the world. Actually, when you Google, I Googled just in preparation for this podcast, I Googled like the main chronic diseases. And obviously I think there was like 10 that come up on Google, for example. Yes. But at the end of the day, like I'm sure there's, as I said, like many out there that affect people. And
yes. Yeah. And what you've got to realize is men and, the human race have created diseases. We plunk together 3 or 4 symptoms and call it a disease.
Yeah.
But the reality is inflammation happens everywhere. So if you've got inflammation in your joint, you've got inflammation in all your 30 trillion cells. Right. Everything happens everywhere at the same time.
And I imagine then you need to clean it out and deal with it, which I'm sure we'll talk about in a moment as well.
Exactly.
And something that I'm really interested in is living in London as well, especially, you're on the tube sometimes, you're in public transport, you're in public generally, and, everyone looks a little bit fatigued. Everyone looks tired. Everyone's got, I'm sure there's different reasons in everyone's life why people can be miserable or upset about things. However, there's a sense of fatigue, I think, right?
Yes.
Especially maybe somewhere like London in the winter where there's not much sunlight. Why is everyone fatigued in big cities and then maybe generally just fatigue as a concept? Why does that happen to people?
So you're totally right. I often say to people, even in well-being, we're about 50% of our optimal state. So you feeling great, you're still 50% of your capability. But of course, you wouldn't know that because you've only got your old self to compare to. So we are all suboptimal. Now, being in cities, going back to our cells being in the savannah, our cells need to be in nature. They need to be around fresh air, fresh water. What is a city? It's congested. We're breathing in heavy metals. We're breathing in toxins. We're seeing too much white light. We have radiation around us all the time. So these silent intruders are coming into us and depleting our energy. So why we're fatigued is because we've got these internal conflicts just absorbing our nutritional status, absorbing energy, and everything's about energy. So if it's doing this, less is available for your well-being. But we just get used to it because your colleagues tired and your neighbor's tired. So we're living in this same lane together and doing nothing about it. And of course, by being tired, we think less well, we behave less well. We go to other comforts like carbohydrate food or alcohol. And these are basically things we do because we are suboptimal.
No, it's super interesting. And from my point of view, something that's really interesting to maybe speak about is how you look at curing versus preventing disease and ailments, and then where human optimization comes into this. What's your kind of view on that?
I mean, for me, there are 3 lanes. The lane that we look at is illness mostly. So hospitals, GP surgeries, clinics are all about illness. They're about diagnosing an illness and giving treatment for an illness. And that constitutes most of healthcare. And then there's a bit of prevention. Eat well, exercise, sleep well, and you'll probably not get these diseases. For me, the reality is that the environment is toxic. So technically, both of those things are far too late. Human optimization is about going one step further and saying, is there a better version of yourself? And then how do we get that better version out of you? So what we've done is look at the things that go wrong at the cell level. And they've been sort of put in research, and we found there's only 12 things. They're called the 12 hallmarks of aging. These are 12 processes that go wrong in your cell level that cause disease and decline. Now, if we know what they are, then surely we should be able to do something. And at Levitas, what we've done is found a process for dealing for those 12 biological processes. And you know how many there are? Only 6.
Wow.
Now, those 6 things could manage all of those diseases. And you'd ask yourself, well, why isn't it happening? Well, it is happening, but it's happening in a very random matrix out there. So people grab a supplement from hair, do a bit of cryo because that's what they've heard about, take sleeping tablets, do mindfulness, but in a random way. But if you did this in a proper organized sequence, you will get outcomes.
Yeah. I love to talk about that. I love to talk about what the starting process looks like for someone. Be interesting to maybe split it out, or maybe to focus on kind of your process at Levitas and what, your process is. And then we can then talk a little bit after about, I guess, someone maybe just like today, how they can get started with optimizing their habits and stuff. But with Levitas and kind of your process, I know a little bit about kind of the Nomad program that you run as well, which looks amazing. But if someone come to you and they were, they had a problem, some ailment, what's kind of the initial start and how do we move forward from that?
So I think this is really important. We have to explain what is happening to individuals, because they often come from a conventional model of expecting a drug, expecting a test, and therefore looking at an outcome along those bases. We think very differently. If you've come in with an ailment, you're inflamed. So that's the starting point of our discussion. And if that ailment is your tummy, then we say your brain's inflamed, your legs are inflamed, all your body's inflamed. So let's now talk about inflammation. And then we talk about, well, why are you inflamed? And we say to people, your body's not in a disease form, it's in a distress form. And inflammation is an expression of distress. And we talk about the journey about living in the environment we're in, which is a very nurtured environment, but our cells belong in nature. So we explain that journey. And then we show them evidence. Now, yes, we do tests, but it's how we interpret these tests. So with inflammation in our mind, we look at body fat as a signal of inflammation. We look at raised cholesterol as a signal of inflammation. We don't sort of say raised cholesterol is a disease. It's something's not quite right in your system. Now, in the most cases, we have to build the infrastructure in the body. The first thing we have to do is build the scaffolding in the body. We call it the restoration phase. And there's only 5 things we do. There are 3 or 4 key micronutritional things you have to do, and 2 or 3 hormones that need to be evaluated and fixed. Because without having lanes and infrastructures talking to each other, the body can't move forwards, which is why you can take as many vitamins and supplements as you want. But if there's no road for them to travel on, it's not going to work. So we look at iron, we look at B12, and we look at hormones like testosterone, progesterone, DHEA. Now, these are basically the pillars of your scaffolding. Once we fix that, we then go into emptying out the debris. Because we've lived in an inflammatory process, there's debris in our body that's slowing us down, and we've got to get rid of that debris. And what we do is 2 things. We clean the gut out, your small intestine, which is where predominantly 70% of your immune system sits. Wow. And we use strong herbs to empty that out. It's tough, but you can't win without getting the gut fixed first. Then we empty the internal larders of your body, I call them. In your body, you've got a big larder of sugar called glycogen. It's like several hundred stored Mars bars. Then you've got this debris. You make 3.8 million cells every second. The old cells don't go. They stay in garbage cans in every one of your cells. And effectively, they only get brought out when you're not eating. But of course, we eat all the time. So we're filling the front of the fridge and not emptying this back of the fridge, which is decaying and causing disease. And Professor Usimi, who won the Nobel Prize in 2016, says all you have to do is empty that out and you can kill off inflammation. Wow. Something so simple. Yep. And then your third larder, your fat larder. Now, your fat larder is not going to come into play until you empty larder number 1 out. And of course, we never do because we're always feeding the front of the fridge. So people wonder why I can't lose weight. It's because the sugar's there. And then, of course, the sugar creates craving. And as you know, from that perspective, it goes on. So after cleaning out the gut, we clean out the sugar larder by making you not eat for 3 days. Just take water. And then after that, the body will go and eat all this horrible protein debris I was talking about. It'll recycle protein to brand new protein, and you'll empty out the whole of your body. And literally, that in itself is a phenomenal way of cleaning out your potential risk of disease. Yeah. After that, you start biohacking fat. You will lose weight watching telly. Wow. You don't have to go to gyms because your body will eat the fat and create energy. Now, your brain's made of fat, so your brain gets fed before your body does. So the dopamine drops, and you get into this state of feeling a clarity of thought and not feeling hungry. So we're kind of taking you back to your predecessors in the savannah who naturally have days where they don't eat, so they will get rid of the sugar. They'll have days when they don't eat for several days where they'll start autophagizing, removing their debris. So they're cleaning out because nature has adapted them to clean out and be well. So we're taking you backwards to move forwards.
It's absolutely fascinating. There's so much in that to kind of like jump on it.
That's the second phase.
Right,
There's a third phase.
Right, okay, please.
So once you've fixed the infrastructure, cleaned out it's almost like the cars without MOT off the motorway. You're left with the Lamborghinis and Ferraris. Then we repair the most important thing in modern day. It's called your vagus nerve. Your vagus nerve is your rest and digest nerve. It's the thing that calms you down. The other nerve is the sympathetic nerve, which winds you up. And we are all wound up right from school age onwards. So what's happened is we're imbalanced. Now, to open up the vagus nerve, we've got to fix your gut. Having cleaned your gut, we fix your gut with probiotics and peptides to stop leakiness. And we get your sleep sorted. Without sleep, you can't heal. So we use things to stop the cortisol at night so you can sleep well and heal well. And then we go into renew, and that takes us into a different zone. And that's where you come back and tell us, I feel the best I've ever done. Where can I go from here?
Right.
So renewal will involve things like hormetic stress, cryo, mindfulness, breath work. Because your body's now receptive to this, it'll work. If you started at the beginning of the journey, nothing would work because there's a saber-toothed tiger in you eating everything up.
So what I've gathered from that is that you need to clean out the system, which I imagine probably for a lot of people can be quite painful and quite a kind of like a, not painful, but maybe a journey in a way to get to a point where they're getting rid of a lot of the old cells and a lot of the things that have been holding them down for probably since birth. A lot of people that haven't had any detox protocols or gone through any of this. So if we kind of pull that apart a little bit, if we start with, I guess, how long does that process actually take, would you say, from the start to kind of the final process?
It's not as long as people might think. So the gut detox is 6 weeks maximum.
Right.
And we always clear the gut out, and then we move on to what they call the fast. And that's a 2-week program.
Wow.
So 6 weeks plus 2 weeks is a control or delete on a lifetime of behavior. You will change your physiology to a totally different place. And why we don't fail is because you're a mammal. We're working with your genes. So, the reality is everyone could benefit from this, because if you have chronic illness or any symptom, cleaning out is the way forward.
And in terms of kind of how people will feel after they've gone through this process, at the moment, we see a lot of conversation around antidepressants and drug medications for treating mental health problems. When it comes to focusing on detoxing and regenerative medicine and kind of looking at it from the cell level, what impact have you seen with your patients when it comes to the impact it has on their mental clarity and their mental health and their outlook on life moving forward?
Well, as I've said, everything happens everywhere at the same time. If you have inflammation in your knee, your brain's inflamed. So technically, going back to that inflammation argument, you're removing inflammation everywhere. So when it comes to mental clarity, people have greater bandwidth, greater tolerance, they sleep better, they have greater energy, they're less depressed. They just turn into different human beings, and they're quite surprised. But what we're doing is changing people from a reactive person, where they're constantly firing off cortisol and reacting, to a responsive person. So everything gets better, including mental health.
Wow.
And I believe, and certainly our experience has shown, that conditions like neurodiversity, ADHD, where we think drugs are the only solution, it is not true. By cleaning these individuals out, by feeding the brain correctly or allowing the brain to be fed correctly, we find they stay more in the present. We've had several cases where drugs have been stopped just because people have cleaned out and fed the brain with the correct nutrition.
With ADHD, is this something you've seen in people that have ADHD as well?
Absolutely.
That's really interesting. I don't have ADHD, but I've got a couple of friends that have got it. And they tell me about kind of the way that, there's only one kind of route that is portrayed, I guess, that they can go down: medication, some kind of therapy or whatever it might be to kind of diagnose it. But I haven't actually heard personally about this being able to heal it.
So ADHD is where the brain is just working at super fast speed, and therefore in almost a state of fight or flight or inflammation. And because of that, people are often not in the room, not in the present, but also they're often right-sided thinkers. They're perceptive, they're intuitive. And the conventional world works on the left side logic. 1 + 1 = 2, 3 + 5 = Often the ADHD brain is perceptive. They see the endpoint very quickly without that process. So convention is often against them, number one, which can make them feel vulnerable. And secondly, they've got 50 television sets in their head at the same time. So they're utilizing energy. Your brain is 2% of your total cellular volume? It uses 20% of the energy in normal states. These guys are running 10 times quicker. So they get depleted. And when they get depleted, the body makes sugar to try and support it. But the brain doesn't like sugar. It wants fats. So they tend to feed the brain with sugar, get more wired. And then the agitation and the insomnia and all the issues, all the social issues arise from that. What we do is autophagize the sugar out so they can't react anymore. We feed their brain with fat, which is what the brain wants because it's 70% fat, through biohacking. and they calm right down again.
That's crazy.
And nootropics.
Yeah.
We're cerebral beings. Our predecessors were physical beings. We were out there hunting, gathering, and injuring ourselves, and the body would tell the brain what to do.
Yeah.
Now the brain's telling the body what to do.
It's really interesting. And you kind of mentioned autophagy there. A lot of people won't know what autophagy is exactly.
Yeah.
I've only in the last few months started to learn more about it myself. Can you speak a little bit about obviously fasting and kind of how that then leads into autophagy and just for people to understand what that means?
So fasting is something that's happened in cultures for thousands of years. Even Hippocrates used to treat his patients through fasting several thousand years ago. So autophagy it translates as auto, as in eating, myself, and phagy, eating, so eating myself. So the concept is that if you don't feed the front of your fridge, you have to eat from the back of it. So if you don't put food in your mouth, the body will find things within it to feed itself from. And usually it's the debris and these extra larders.
Is that why you get depleted in certain nutritional levels and stuff like vitamins and stuff like that, minerals?
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So once you stop eating, you will find nutrition from within, but as long as you feed it with the vitamins, the cells don't suffer. So autophagy is a way of cleaning out your body by almost internal cannibalism.
What is the difference between ketosis and autophagy? From my point of view, they're very similar, but what would be the difference?
So autophagy is the process of finding food from within you. And once you start finding food from within you, you inevitably will be starting to eat fat. The byproduct of biohacking fat is ketones. So when you look at ketones in the blood, it tells you how much you're using fat for food versus sugar. We do something called a glucose ketone index. And if your glucose is high and your ketones low, you're not using fat. But if your ketone starts getting high, it means the body's biohacking fat because it's a byproduct of fat metabolism.
Okay, so you can track all of this and it's very clear what you can see the levels. Yeah,
yes.
That's super interesting. So you're mentioning high fat diet. I imagine healthy fats is probably where it's at. In terms of kind of the ideal diet, obviously there's a lot of different diets out there, paleo and vegans, vegetarians. From your experience with patients and in practice, what is the ideal diet for someone? Yeah.
So to find out what the ideal diet is, you've got to go back several 100,000 years and find out how your predecessors were living. Usually, they didn't travel so far. They traveled within a few 100 square miles at most because we didn't have cars, aeroplanes, etc. So often cultures' gut or microbiome, your gut microbiome, developed based on what you're eating. So if you're in a jungle, there'll be more greenery, plantation. If you're in a desert, it'd be different. If you're by the sea, it would be different. So there was never a problem in these individuals because their gut microbiome worked with what they were eating. In modern metropoles like London, you could be eating multiple diets from all over the world and your poor microbiome doesn't have a clue what's going on because it's constantly confused. So my view, the ideal diet is one that has sort of changes. So it's what we call metabolic diversity. So it shouldn't be completely vegetarian all the time. It shouldn't be completely carnivore all the time. It shouldn't be completely paleo. And what we call it is seasonal variation. Eat seasonally if you can, because we live in circadian seasons, and vary the diet. Because when you vary the diet over a period of months, you vary the gut microbiome. So you give it a chance to get used to something after 3 months, and then you change it again and get it used to something else for 3 months. By getting more diversity in your microbiome, you increase your defenses. And remember, you have 38 trillion bacteria there. You're only made of 30 trillion cells. You have more bacteria than human cells. So a varied diet is important. We're now seeing a lot of people with intolerances. Now, are intolerances true intolerances or are they guts that are not behaving right and telling you? And what we're finding is it's usually the latter. Fix the gut and the intolerances go.
Have you seen that at all with people that have got gluten intolerances or, different, not allergies, but intolerances? Do they clean up? Or people that think they have got celiac and then 2 months later they don't, for example?
Yes. And again, taking digestive enzymes and probiotics without cleaning the gut out, they're not going to work. So we go through an aggressive gut process of cleaning the gut out, then fixing the microbiome, then fixing the leaky gut, and then looking at peptides. And if you do that, the gut starts behaving properly. So these intolerances will go. Yeah.
I'd love to get onto peptides in a moment, but just to finish off the part around diet, something that I've been seeing a lot more about on social media, and there's a lot of fad diets out there, a lot of conversation. You don't really know what to trust anymore online. But there's a lot of conversation around carnivore diet and meat-based diets And then also around, probably a lot of the time, it's these same people that talk about oxalates that are in plant-based foods. And so I really was interested to know from your opinion, from a personal perspective, I'm sure it'll be interesting for people to hear about as well, what your thoughts were on a meat-based diet, and then people that talk about a lot of plants having high oxalates, which are obviously can be toxic to humans.
So it's a very good point. My feeling is if the food is whole, it doesn't really matter. Now, the problem is food is no longer whole. The soil has got hormones in it. The soil lacks minerals. Meats are hormonally manipulated to preserve. Same with plants. So actually what you think you're eating it is food, but it isn't nutrition. So the reality is, the first thing I say is try and eat whole food as much as you can. Now, we don't have the privilege of being able to cook, make our, grow our own plants, etc. But generally, if you can try and eat whole food, that's the first priority. Whether it's vegetarian or meat, it doesn't matter. Make it whole food. The second thing to say is that the oxalate processing is not so much the plant going wrong, it's the environment it's growing up that's gone wrong. And we don't take that into account because, even the air has got lots of heavy metals in. It all gets absorbed into the soil and the water and it gets contaminated. So again, whole food would get you around a lot of the toxins, number one. Number two, going back to metabolic diversity, I would say that it would be wise not to go pure carnivore, not to go pure vegetarian, and just vary the diet. So cycle it. And a good cycling mechanism is every 2 or 3 months. So your gut microbiome just adjusts to that diet. It has enough time to adjust to that diet. And then when you shift, it adjusts to a new one. That way you get a strong microbiome that's resilient. We often see people who are fine in their own countries. They go to another country and they get really sick. It's because the microbiome's not ready for that yet. Whereas if you develop that resilience, you're more likely to stay well because 70% of your immune system is in the gut.
Wow.
And therefore, look after these bacteria, nurture them, vary them.
And I'm sure there'll be genetic differences as well between people and people's guts who prefer certain varieties of diet. I guess you need to test this and kind of just find out what works best for you. But I guess because food's so easy to get these days and processed foods, people get lazy. So
yes, I think if we were living in a community where we never moved, that would be relevant. But now food is exported, imported from all over the world. So the food situation versus where people are is now changing rapidly. And that's part of the problem. We're not giving enough time for the gut microbiome to adjust to it.
For sure. Yeah, no, definitely. So going back to peptides. So you mentioned a bit about peptides. What are peptides and how are you using them at the moment in your practice?
Yeah. So my belief is that the solution to well-being is nutrition. And, the reason why we're ill is because we're not seeing the same levels of nutrition that we should be seeing. We live in abundance, but are built for scarcity. That's the other thing. So we're taking a lot of things in that are not good for us. Now, peptides, what are they? Well, basically, you're made of protein. You exist because you're made of protein. And if we dissect the smallest version of protein, they're called amino acids. So you're made of a selection of these 20 essential amino acids in different sequences. Now, to be fed, each of your genes that expresses a certain characteristic, so the gene for your skin, the gene for your heart, the gene for your kidney, it needs a certain type of food and it needs a certain type of protein. And what peptides are chains of these amino acids in different sequences, a bit like Lego pieces, that specifically feed that part of the gene, which is incredible. So there'll be a peptide for your eye, a peptide for your heart, and a peptide for your kidney. And this particular protein will go only in that space, open up the space of the DNA, clean it out and feed it and say, keep working, which is amazing. Now, we wouldn't have to have this discussion thousands of years ago because protein was pure and the body was able to break it down and make these peptides. But of course, protein isn't now. So they've been able to form peptides for the majority of your organs now. And they will go in and feed that particular organ. And they're going to be the future because, as we know, root cause is about the DNA and cell journey. Feed the DNA properly, and the cell journey is going to be amazing.
Yeah. In terms of specifically, where are you using peptides at the moment? And then you mentioned that you can be used in various different ways. I think somewhere where I've seen it quite a lot is kind of in male optimization, kind of hormones and TRT therapy is quite important. I think Joe Rogan, who's a big podcaster, talks a lot about it. But I guess TRT is different. But in terms of peptides, where are the main areas that you see are kind of working really well at the moment?
Well, I think because we're all suboptimal, everyone should take bioregulated peptides for a start, because we're looking at a point when you haven't got a symptom. So you want to feed that cell properly so you never get symptoms. So we use peptides across the board. Some people stack them, so they rotate between different organs each year. The personal training and the sort of athlete sport world have been honed in on this much earlier than we have, and particularly for muscle recovery and repair. So they use things like BPC 157 compound to help muscle recovery and repair. There's also growth hormone peptides, because that's the sort of ultimate hormone. And again, taking growth hormone can be problematic because it can stimulate cell production in the wrong way. But if you feed the growth hormone, it'll only eat what it needs to. You can't overfeed it. So again, a very good way of optimizing growth hormone production is peptides. We have muscle peptides to help support muscle growth. We have adrenal peptides to help the adrenal gland. And we're all adrenally dysfunctional because we live in the modern world. And the popular ones are things like thymus for your immune system and pineal. The pineal peptide is for your third eye, the pineal gland, and it is directly linked to longevity. And do you know which hormone it makes?
Go ahead.
Melatonin.
Wow.
So melatonin is thought to be used for jet lag, but actually it's your sleep hormone, and it's anti-inflammatory and anti-cancer. And we're all depleted because we're seeing too much white light. So again, peptides.
And what process is this? At what point, is this introduced into that journey that you mentioned earlier?
So as I said, if you're not clean and you're full of debris, it's a bit like this room. If it was full of newspapers and junk, you couldn't get through the door. So it doesn't matter how well the nutrition, the delivery man's coming.
It's so
not
important to get the first part sorted.
You've got to clean out. But equally, the delivery man's got to be able to get here. So you've got to complete the infrastructure pathways before you detoxify. So get a pathway in here so that the skip can take the rubbish out, then fix the walls. But if you can't see the walls, there's no point. So peptides come in the renewal phase, phase 4, once everything's cleaned and fixed.
Right. Okay, cool. Yeah. It's very like stage by stage. It's very thought out and it's methodical in the way that
and
it's
I think this
set
is
out.
the problem. When you're struggling with your health and you hear about something, you just go and grab it and then you grab something else. But all I'm saying is there's a series of events at a particular journey pathway that has to happen. And if that was the case, then things would work.
Yeah, no, 100%. It makes sense. And I feel like that's what people are looking for at the moment. They're looking for something where it's just like, okay, tell me what to do that makes sense. That's not going to, necessarily be big pharma where they know they're trying to benefit from them, and something that actually is getting to the root cause of it, right?
And there's no wrong intervention.
Right.
It's just the timing of the intervention.
Right, yeah.
So if you do the restoration followed by the detox, i.e. the release, then the repair, then the renewal, it all works.
Okay, right. So we spoke about peptides, but in terms of supplementation, because I know there's it's a huge industry now as well. In terms of some of the supplements that you use in your practice when it comes to just keeping things like on top of things like vitamin D or whatever else it might be, where do they come into the process and at what stage? And can you give us some examples as well?
Yes. So in the first stage, it's fundamental we get the vitamin D, ferritin, and B12 right, and your hormones right. So we bring them in the first stage because they're your infrastructure. As you clean out, then you can go into the other vitamins that are more maintenance vitamins. And in our case, we lead, as I said, a very cerebral life. So we love to feed the brain. So we talk about omega fats, we talk about B12, we talk about folate, we talk about magnesium, zinc, etc. So these are things that just keep the immune system going. We're now using a lot of cordyceps, interestingly. Mushrooms have phenomenal powers for the gut-brain axis and various other things. So the daytime is about giving energy. And also from the hormones, we use DHEA in the morning. And if you're suboptimal in your testosterone too. There's nothing wrong with it at the right levels. In fact, it's anti-aging at the right levels. It's been given a bad press, but it's all about the right levels and the right place. Once we've sorted the morning out, we've got to wind you down in the evening. So we use a lot of things to reduce your cortisol levels at night. So we use something like phosphorylated serine, tells the brain you don't have to worry the adrenal gland tonight. We use ashwagandha, phenomenal adaptogenic. We use melatonin and we use magnesium. So it's about energy in the day, the right energy, not the wrong energy, not cortisol energy, not immune energy, not hormonal energy, but ATP energy. Right energy in the morning, and then servicing the body at night by sleeping, not having the cortisol awake. Because when cortisol's awake, melatonin doesn't come out to play.
When you said it out like this, it sounds so simple.
It is very simple.
But then you've got like the world who are so sick, and there's people that are walking around confused as to why they're so fatigued and ill and stuff. But
because I think the reality is they have kind of got themselves that they're quite toxic.
Yeah.
So these inflammatory markers are just depleting them from within.
Yeah.
It's not visible, and they get used to being themselves.
For sure. Yeah.
Whereas those who are super energetic, they just have that additional bandwidth to see these things. You become more perceptive.
Yeah, very true.
And I think we're losing perception.
Yeah, no, for sure. People are getting too used to feeling rubbish when actually there's such a big opportunity to feel better.
Yeah, and your capacity is 123. So, you have enough stem cells to keep you going there.
Yeah.
So, you know, we shouldn't accept decline.
Yeah. Oh, so interesting. And you mentioned sleep, and you mentioned kind of the protocol a little bit more towards the evening. What are the kind of issues that people come to you when it comes to sleep? Like, okay, you had a bad night's sleep. Like, what does that mean exactly? And is that something that people come to you as kind of like the main issue as well? It's like, I can't sleep. I don't know what's going on. And then how would you kind of, work to resolve that?
We have to remember, if you can't sleep, it's linked to what's happening to you in the day. Right. If you're not using the right energy in the day, you're going to be producing the wrong energy at night. That's a simple thing. So you cannot detach day and night. So you have to put everything into context. But generally in this modern day, there are two sleep patterns that we see. One, I can't get to sleep, doctor. And the other is I'm exhausted, so I get to sleep, but then I get my 2 a.m. wake-up call and I can't get back to sleep. And some have mixed, i.e. both. Now, the person who can't get to sleep, it's literally the fact that they have got too much cortisol. So they're usually working on their computers late at night. They're watching movies that are quite action-packed. So they're winding their brain up. And of course, cortisol won't let you sleep. So we tell them that you've got to get some sort of pattern of stepping down, emptying out before you go to sleep. But we also use things like melatonin and the standard release form so we can induce that sleep. Ideally, your melatonin should start being produced by 9 o'clock. So again, getting into a circadian sleep habit of trying to get to sleep between 9 and 10 is a good thing. People just don't do that. They work late and then they habitually you can't sleep. That's one pattern. The second pattern is that wake up call at 2 a.m. And these are usually the ones who are wired. They're so tired, but they're wired. And again, taking the cortisol out of the system at night by using the things I mentioned, ashwagandha, cerephos, melatonin, magnesium, gets them through that journey, because you should peak your melatonin at 2 a.m. If you don't, and you have that wake up call, you're not making enough of it.
Yeah.
Now, of course, that can only happen if we address why they're so wired. And usually that's a daytime issue. Not happy at work,
too much coffee,
stressed, caffeine, depleted in their physiology. So the body's relying on adrenaline and cortisol. So we explain to them that this is bigger than just sleep. This is your gut not working right. You're toxic, and it takes us back to the 6 hours. So the solution to sleep is back to the 6 hours.
Yeah. And I think you spoke about, I've watched some of your kind of content online. You spoke about the adrenal glands quite often. You speak a little bit about being able to actually identify if they're overreacting or if they're working too hard.
Yes.
How does that kind of process look when you're actually initially kind of vetting someone to work out what's going on?
It's a good question. I mean, do we have to do a test to find it, or can we find out from questioning? 99% you can find out from questioning.
Wow. Yeah.
So you ask them, when you wake up in the morning, how do you feel? And if they say, I feel shattered, like I haven't slept, you know that there's an adrenal problem, because your cortisol level should double when you wake up. And if you're not getting that doubling, you're fatigued. So that it could mean that the adrenal gland's been working overnight, and therefore you have no cortisol in the morning to wake up. The other thing is you ask them about their general attitude to exercise and how their muscles repair and renew. And usually when they say that they feel fatigued very quickly, they get injured quickly, it could be testosterone depletion. So again, linked to the fact that maybe the adrenal gland is stealing hormones. Right. So that gives you a clue. You then find out how their day goes, and if they talk about afternoon fatigue, you know the adrenal gland is crashing. And so that will give you an idea of adrenal fatigue. There are others who are super wired. They haven't slept. They wake up like adrenalized, agitated. They need to run or do something just to remove that tension. And these are the guys who are high on cortisol. They're often irritable, intolerant, edgy, can't sit still. And you find that they're the ones who are just totally wired. And usually they're misdiagnosed with ADHD or something like that.
Yeah.
And so, of course, when they're running at a million miles per hour all day, it's not the car just can't sort of get cool. So they carry that adrenaline and their cortisol into the early hours. And they're usually the ones who can't get to sleep.
I imagine a lot of business owners and founders, and that's probably a lot of people that you come across.
And founders particularly. But you can cope with that for a few months. But if it becomes a lifetime habit, the wired stage becomes the tired phase. So when you're adrenalized to that level, you'll run out of steam and then you'll go into fatigue.
But then do you find that there's, there must be top tier CEOs and people that are under huge stress that are able to go through this type of process? They're still going to endure stress during the day, of course, but they're able to come to a point where the cortisol comes down towards the evening, or how does that look for someone that's like a really...
So once we've done the process, we're not going to stop the pressure coming in, but they're no longer a reactor to it. They become a responder. They're able to triage what's important, what's not important. They're able to breathe through the issues. So the body's cortisol levels don't rise given the same stressor. So the reason why they react is they're depleted. If they're not depleted, they become a responder. And that's the thing. This is not about stop your stress. Stress is out there. Stop your reaction and become a responder.
Yeah. Wow. Super interesting. Yeah. Again, it makes total sense when you kind of like outline it like that.
And when you're a CEO or a COO, you have a duty to maintain your physiology.
Right.
So you can make those right decisions for lots of people.
Of course. Yeah.
You're not going to do anyone any favors by being physiologically depleted, because you will be mentally depleted too.
Sure. Yeah. The ride is not going to last for them to do that. And so I was interested whilst you were talking there, just a little bit, I think we spoke about it before, about the nervous system.
Yeah.
And obviously talking about supplementation and more from the physiological level, we've discussed that in depth today. But something that I guess is also interesting is the idea of kind of mindfulness practices and spirituality in certain ways, and spiritual practices. And obviously something like yoga kind of is a little bit of, it kind of transcends that in a way.
Yeah.
Is that something that you recommend when you're going through these protocols that are obviously quite heavy in ways when it comes to detox and then into supplementation? Is that something that, you've noted or have any research around?
Absolutely. Yes. So we've talked about the restore, the release, the repair, the renew. Number 5 is reframe. When you are physically nourished, you have the capacity to take on another dimension. Now, remember, the sympathetic nervous system is what's driving us, the fight or flight. Spirituality, mindfulness is about your vagus nerve, the rest and digest. So you've got to almost get into balance. And without these processes, you won't get into balance. But without restoring yourself, you can't even get there anyway. So there's a timing element.
Right.
And for us, it's in the reframe stage. And what we find is that if you can do, say, for example, proper breath work, proper yoga, what you're trying to do is stimulate your vagus nerve, the nerve that is telling you you're allowed to now relax, and your digestive system gets better, you sleep better, and it's self-fulfilling. And you can't do it without mindfulness and these therapies. And remember, effectively, we are born in the primordial world. So breath work, was normal. You're breathing in air properly at that point. We don't breathe properly anymore. And basically breathing through the nose creates nitric oxide and it's healing. Mindfulness is about calming the sympathetic nervous system down so the vagus nerve can pick up again. So it is absolutely essential that people do this. Spirituality, to me, is very important. Most people have to feel that there's something bigger than themselves out there. And what is spirituality? Spirituality is intuition and perception and gut feel. And that's right-sided brain functioning, not left-sided. Children, when they grow up and learn to walk and talk, they don't use the left side of the brain. They do the right side. They watch you and they watch the environment. They learn from perception. Then we go to school and learn 1 + 1 = 2 and 3 + 2 = 5. We start saturating the left side of the brain and stop relying on perception and intuition. And in fact, that is what mindfulness is. It's about opening that part of the brain up, which is limitless, by the way. The world's memory champion, who can remember 3,400 digits in order, uses the right side of his brain, not the left. And he believes that the right side has limitless memory.
Wow. Yeah. Nice.
That's what mindfulness is.
Yeah. It's fascinating. Yeah. And I think it's just super important. And people, it's when we think about education as well sometimes, and kind of like what children are taught in school and these kinds of areas, it's something that I wish that, I was taught earlier on. You get to post-university or during university sometimes, or some people might, I certainly did. And it's kind of, okay, you start questioning things and you start kind of, trying to work out or asking them big questions to yourself, right? So it's super fascinating to kind of touch on.
No, we're so saturating with exams and things. We're not thinking about the intuition.
Yeah.
And in fact, the right side of the brain opens up in nature.
Yeah. I'm just sitting with yourself and just kind of like, being with yourself and trying to then identify by being present. Okay, how am I feeling? Where is the issues? Where, is there a tinge of kind of disappointment at the moment or whatever it might be? So yeah, I just thought I'd mention that because it's an interesting topic. Something that's also been really popular over the last few years, you mentioned breath work.
Yes.
Wim Hof is obviously kind of a leader when it comes to cold plunges and kind of ice baths, and also breath work accompanying that. Is that something that you incorporate into protocols that you give to patients? Yes, and have you seen any research within
Fantastic. I've done it myself. I mean, the great thing is you don't have, it's 3 to 5 minutes of focused breathing. Yeah. Essentially, we're not built to breathe through our mouths. We're supposed to breathe through our noses. So retraining people to breathe through their noses, deep breath in and exhaling. What it does is basically calms the sympathetic nervous system down, opens up the vagus nerve. So it's super powerful. And, you know, the elixir of life is oxygen. It's out there. We just don't breathe it in. And when we talk, we don't breathe. We just spend a lot of time talking. Yeah. So breath work's very important. Cold plunges, this is hormesis. Short stresses are good for your body. Right. So an acute scare, freezing cold, just for short bouts, actually increases the body's drive and kills off bad cells. So we call that hormetic stress. That's good for you. Chronic stress is the opposite. No. It's not good for you. But one thing we've learned with this is you've got to want to do it, because if you go into a cold plunge thinking you're going to have a heart attack, the brain registers that thought and you get a negative consequence. If you go in saying it's going to be cold, but I'm going to be better, you get a positive consequence. And research has shown cortisol levels under both situations. When you're worried, cortisol goes up. When you're not worried, cortisol goes down. So you in fasting is a form of hormesis. So you must go into it knowing it's going to be good for you. Otherwise, it won't be.
And something I found out about recently as well was that growth hormone actually increases, does it? When it comes to cold plunge and fasting, which is crazy to think about.
Well, logically, if you're in that acute stress, the body has to step its game up. Right. So it starts with the master hormone. Autophagy, fasting, increases your growth hormone by 500%. Wow. It can triple your testosterone, so it can protect your muscles and says, eat everything else.
Yeah. That's crazy.
Your body's amazing.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I've already got personally a lot that I'm going to start working on after this podcast today. So you spoke a little bit about athletes as well, I think earlier on, and we spoke about kind of how peptides are being used quite often there. Just for, let's say, the average person that wants to get into shape, lose a bit of fat, increase muscle. When it comes to kind of recommendations on training and kind of being active, how do you normally present this to patients?
Yeah, this is really important because not everyone has an hour or two to go to the gym. A lot of people are busy. What I tend to say is keep moving. We're not built to sit. We need to keep moving. So what I talk about is exercise snacks in these individuals. You know, dress appropriately, do 10 squats, every 20 minutes. It's not going to build up a sweat, but over a day, you could end up doing 200-300 squats, a few press ups in between the day. So incorporate movement into your life. Because if you're trying to get to the gym with all, you get tired, you don't get there, nothing happens. And it doesn't have to be like that. The other thing about doing this on a regular basis is that it gives you sort of motivation and focus. So rather than have a cup of coffee or a gossip, just do 20 press ups. Yeah. Much better for you. And it's important that you do this as part and parcel of your day-to-day existence. Brisk walking. I'm a great believer in earthing, barefoot walking in terms of removing stress, because you remember most of our issues are not physical, they're cerebral. So we've got to calm the brain down, not build up the body. And then of course when it comes to muscle mass, we know muscle mass is really important. A lot of us are testosterone depleted. Again, look at the hormones, optimize them. You don't have to do as much exercise to maintain things, because often it's the depletion of testosterone that leads to muscle mass loss, both in men and women.
That's fascinating. Yeah. And I think a lot of people now who are getting more into looking after their fitness and trying to optimize their health, there's been a big trend when it comes to a lot of the biotech that's coming out at the moment. Yes. I get ads for it all the time as someone that's interested in this space. I had a Whoop strap for a couple years, and then I stopped using it because I kind of found like, wow, I feel really fresh, but I'm like, optimized, like, -3 or whatever it was, 30%. So,
and this is my worry about, we are going to be looking at biomarkers, but they have to be responsible and they have to be in context. Right. So, depending on how you slept, what you're worried about tomorrow will dictate what that biomarker is showing today. Without context, they can be dangerous. They can sort of alert you into thinking you're going to have a heart attack or there's a problem. So your body responds as a part of a normal thing. If I scared you, your blood pressure will go up. That's a response. That's normal. Or reacts where it's constant. And if you don't put context on the response and the reaction, you can cause more harm than good. But if it can enable you to think, oh gosh, I have that difficult conversation every single day. I didn't realize what it did to my blood pressure. You'll stop having that conversation. So the biomarkers should be used to increase awareness, and then exactly as you did, throw them away afterwards.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, no, I think it's good to have to note that and not to get yourself too
you
intertwined with
don't
like,
need
oh,
a
that's
watch
too low.
to tell you you're not sleeping.
Yeah,
You'll know
for
you're
sure.
not sleeping.
For sure, yeah.
Or, but you do need to increase your awareness. And we don't have awareness because we're slightly sort of, our radars are not working properly because they're all toxic.
Yeah,
so
for sure.
That's where they have a use.
Yeah, no, exactly. A balance, I think, is the most important thing there. And one thing I wanted to ask you as well was a little bit about how you're currently seeing the kind of health industry at the moment, especially with the increase of social media over the last few years. There's someone called Brian Johnson. I'm not sure if you've heard about or seen. I'm sure you have. He was a serial entrepreneur, and I think he sold his business, and now he's testing the limits of health on his own body. And in terms of longevity, trying to live past 120. That's kind of how he's framing the marketing. Do you think that is realistic for a human at a certain point in our lifetime or next lifetime to be living past 120 and still be in relatively good shape as he's trying to achieve?
Totally. Yes. Yeah. Absolutely. Wow. And I think this is the thing. What we have to realize is that if we protect our cell and feed our cell, it's capable of going beyond that. We have enough stem cells to keep going to the year 2000 years. So, 120 is easily possible.
Wow.
The problem is our environment is not conducive to it.
Where is the most conducive environment to be healthy and live?
Ideally, you would want to be in nature.
Yeah.
You'd have to be around soil that's fully mineralized. You'll be eating from the soil. There would be no what I call modern day stresses. You would be doing breath work. You'd be going to sleep with the sunset and getting up with the sunrise. You will basically, that's humanization, and also living in a community where people have got your back. So all of these things are conducive to longevity.
Yeah, fascinating. Okay, I'll be moving to Thailand then, I think, in a couple of weeks or somewhere hot. And have you seen many kind of fad health diets or anything out there that actually is a negative for people, especially on social media, on TikTok, that people are consuming that actually is something that they shouldn't be doing? I'm not sure, or patients or people coming to you and saying, oh, I tried this diet or this particular supplement and actually it made me feel worse. Is anything increasing around that?
So I think there are so many diets out there, and when people are unsuccessful with one diet, they move to another. My view is that there's no bad diet. It's about timing. So if you're looking for a dietary solution to an inflammatory internal physiology, you've got to autophagize. Don't change your diet. Just basically empty out and then go to the diet. So I don't think there's a silver bullet with diets.
Right.
And so, you can go paleo, you can go vegan, you can go carnivore, you can go blood group diet. At the end of the day, as long as you're not in it long enough, it's not an issue. But if you don't clean out, none of them are going to work.
Yeah.
For a start, you're not going to absorb them from the gut anyway.
Yeah, for sure. No, it's vital, 100%.
Yeah.
And something that come to mind as well, and I'm sure there's a lot of people out there that are very intrigued about this next topic, is about fat loss injections.
Yes.
That have become super popular, I'd say, over the last 1 to 2 years. There's a mixed opinion on them, a lot of scary stories, and a lot of people that apparently have seen some results. I don't have anyone in my network that's tried it, but is that something that you've seen people come to you and speak about? And what's your opinion on them?
Yeah, so these peptides, effectively, they're a form of peptide. They, basically suppress your appetite. You feel fuller quicker, and therefore you eat less. Now, that would work if that was the problem. The majority of people who put on weight or can't lose weight is because they are super stressed and their cortisol levels are making sugar within them, not from the outside world. So you become a donut-making factory when you're stressed. And we know that when you can't sleep, you're several kilos heavier than someone who can, eating the same food. So does it truly address that element, which is the majority of the people, as opposed to what they put in? So I think, from my point of view, if you use these things, it should be for a limited period of time to basically control what you're putting in front of the fridge. But you have to still deal with what's going on in the
It's
back
not a
of
magic
the fridge.
pill that, you can continue on the same diet and then take this. And it's
I have patients who don't feel confident going straight into the nomad autophagy plan. For them, they kind of change their diet through these injectables for a period of a few months and then can jump into the autophagy plan after that.
Right. That makes sense.
But to rely on it as a long-term thing, I would be skeptical about that. Like most things, we find the research afterwards shows that there are troubles. Already there's some data showing that the stomach hardens after some of these injections every couple of years in a permanent way.
No way.
And again, of course, the stomach has a role. So it kicks the can down the road and other digestive problems may occur.
Yeah, you're trying to achieve one thing and then the next thing.
Yeah, remember, the only thing that looks after you properly is yourself.
Yeah.
The body looks after all its 30 trillion cells. Drugs just look after 1 or 2 linear relationships.
Wow, really interesting. I didn't know that about the stomach hardening. Yeah. I didn't notice also Levitas have opened, or it's been around for a little while, I'm not too sure, a dental practice.
Yes.
And I wanted to mention, oral hygiene. I think a lot of people take it for granted. I've been reading into it a lot recently online, talking about how a lot of kind of, ailments or issues start in the mouth, and then, what saliva is going down into the gut.
Yes, exactly.
Why have you started a dental practice, and where does that fit in with all of this?
So a bit like our journey with longevity medicine, regenerative medicine, which started a decade ago, everyone looked at it with skepticism. And I think the dental world is going through that process now. Teeth are alive things in your mouth. They're not just dead bits of calcium, they're live. And in fact, 50% of the bacteria in your gut come from the mouth. Wow. So if you have 38 trillion bacteria in your gut, half of those are in the mouth. So surely, logically, if we're going to fix your internal systems, we've got to look at the mouth very carefully. Often through weaknesses, through root canals, infections come in. They can affect the heart. Now there's data showing the wrong bacteria in your mouth can cause dementia. Wow. So there's strong links with the mouth and general well-being. So we're focusing on bioregenerative dentistry, sort of looking at things we can put in the mouth to protect the mouth, but then we'll also protect the rest of the body. So for example, alcohol mouthwashes are not good for you. They kill off good bacteria and it causes an ecosystem problem. So we're looking at coconut pulls, copper scrapes.
I use a copper scrape.
Copper scrapes, biofilm work with airflow. So it's about preserving rather than removing. And also getting rid of heavy metals. Like we know that fillings with mercury can cause problems.
Yeah, for sure.
Using more amalgams and things like that.
Yeah, no, definitely. And on the topic of bacteria, I guess it's bacteria or fungi, you spoke about cordyceps, I think, earlier, or maybe we had a conversation about it beforehand. Where are kind of mushrooms at the moment being used in these types of processes to help people with different ailments? Yeah,
again, mushrooms have lived longer than we have. They're so adaptogenic, they can live anywhere.
Right.
They have huge healing properties if used appropriately. So we find that the body likes nature because it comes from there, so it accepts it very naturally rather than the drug, which it won't. So we've used things like reishi, lion's mane. For mood, we now have got certain cordyceps that help the gut-brain axis, which is where everything's going on, and the gut immune axis. And people respond very well because, again, it's part of nature. There's no relative side effects compared to pharmaceutical medication. And again, it's taking people back to what they used to do. And so cordyceps and something called AHCC, it's a mycelium from the shiitake mushroom. It basically increases your T cell responses, your immune system by 60%.
Does that mean people can just eat shiitake mushrooms and they get the same benefit, or
not enough in those? So we have to sort of extract it.
Optimize it.
So we're now sort of looking to indigenous wisdom and using innovation to bring it back through cordyceps.
Fascinating. Yeah, it's been really super fascinating. And to wrap up, I think it'd be really interesting to, I guess, give the audience maybe like 3 tips or things that, you can have in mind that they could, improve their daily habits, or daily habit that would improve their current life or longevity.
So for me, the vitamin D is a phenomenal product, and I don't think we take enough of it. 5,000 units of vitamin D will make a great difference because it works almost on every cell.
5,000, even though it's recommended 2,000 normally, I think, in bottles.
Now the data is 5,000 units a day. But it's an immune modulator, so it works everywhere. So that would be a silver bullet. The second thing is snacking on exercise. I think it just brings a bit of purpose to the day. It breaks it up. The physicality needs to be moved as much as the mental stimulation, and you could do it anywhere. So I think that would be really, really important. And the third thing is try and cut down on carb, full stop.
Yeah.
Because carb is an inflammatory agent. Fats are good, proteins are good, vegetables are good, carb is not good.
What type of fats?
So good fats, avocado, nuts, olive oil, things like that.
Yeah, awesome. It's been a pleasure having you on. Thank you so much
very
for coming
much
today.
Thanks for inviting me.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Take care. Bye.